So welcome from Theo, Nestor and me. Theo and Nestor will be giving a quick presentation on Fuse first, and after that I will chair a Q&A, and I'll chip in with some answers too. I'm a supervisor, visual effects supervisor and director who's been heavily involved in Framestore's use of Unreal for a long time. I've always been a really big believer in the importance of immediacy and interactivity in the creative process. So I've pushed techniques like Fuse for many, many years, going back to working on Gravity, and I saw the possibility of working in this new way, a different way of making films. And as the director of FLITE, the short film project we made in parallel to the development of the Fuse pipeline, I'll be able to give answers from that angle, from the sort of creative directorial angle, to accompany what Theo and Nestor have to say. So please do drop your questions in as we're going along into the question portal. But first, so Theo and Nestor have been key parts of the team at Framestore for a while, Theo for a very long time. And Theo is a great all-rounder, technically and creatively. He CG supervised Guardians of the Galaxy and Christopher Robin and other films, and works a lot on R&D projects as well. And he had worked on quite a few Unreal projects before we came to this, including the multi-award-winning Mars Bus, and a couple of augmented reality projects with me on Magic Leap, which was quite a challenge. You get to learn quite a bit about Unreal doing that. Nestor has a background as a very technically able lighting supervisor on shows like Midnight Sky and Pokemon Movie, and has recently been the CG supervisor on If with John Krasinski. And he had a really avid interest in Unreal and had been using Unreal himself for a while, and had done the Unreal Academy, during which, if I remember correctly, he made a great little short film himself as part of that process. So they were both in an ideal place to combine the traditional pipeline of visual effects and Unreal Engine workflows, and have a lot of interesting things to say about the pipeline and how and why we developed it. So I will hand you over to Theo.
Thanks, Tim. So I'm going to start off talking about the use of game engines generally. So the use of game engine at Framestore is nothing new. Our immersive and our virtual production teams have been using real-time engines such as Unreal for well over a decade now. However, up until we had embarked on Fuse, these use cases were mostly limited to kind of interactive experiences and areas of pre-production such as previs, virtual scouting, or on-set visualization. And there's nothing new to attempt to use game engines to produce narrative content. It's been done in game cinematics for a long time, and numerous short films have appeared over the last few years that are leveraging the power of real-time engines such as Unreal to create narrative content. However, most of these are accomplished using smaller teams of generalists and mostly working on full CG content. What sets Fuse apart from these, and why did we embark on the project in the first place? Well, with Fuse, we want to see how far we could push Unreal Engine to be the hub and the final renderer of a live action visual effects production. We wanted to design a workflow and a tool set that could be used at scale and tested at every stage of the VFX process, from previs all the way through to final comp. Now, in order to do this, we knew we needed a project to do it on, not only to prove out that it could be done, but also to kind of road test the tools as we went along. Designing pipelines is always best done when you've got direct user feedback. Otherwise, it's far too easy to design something that falls apart once you put it into the rigors of real world production. So that's how FLITE came about. FLITE is a 15-minute hybrid CG live action film, and it was directed by Tim, who introduced us here. And what I'm about to show you is a quick behind the scenes kind of teaser of the filming of FLITE. So FLITE was conceived as a real world production. It wasn't one that we specifically designed to suit the strengths of the engine. It takes place in a flooded London 30 years in the future, and is mostly told via the memories of one of the key characters. The film features long, continuous, highly complex shots and the vast majority of which are CG rendered directly out of Unreal Engine and integrated with key live action elements that we filmed on an LED stage, as you can see here. With FLITE, we wanted to push a number of new techniques, from the methodology behind the creation of hybrid live action CG characters, to the novel ways in which we kind of use the LED stage in conjunction with motion capture to tightly couple CG and live action elements together. Of course, when the idea behind Fuse was conceived, we didn't know all the complexities that the FLITE production was going to throw at us. But what we did feel strongly was that a new VFX workflow was possible with a real-time engine at its core, and that this could offer some key advantages over traditional approaches. Now, to talk you through how we went about designing that toolset and that workflow, I'm going to hand you over to Nestor, and then I'll come back at the end to talk a little bit about how those tools and techniques affected the production of FLITE.
Great. Thank you, Theo. Yeah, my name is Nestor Prado, and I was the product owner for Fuse and the real-time supervisor for FLITE. And we're going to talk about game engines in the context of linear content creation, which in that case, they let us rapidly assemble the broad strokes of our vision, and they let us quickly iterate and try out new things. But with this speed comes a bit of fragility. On the other hand, we have VFX pipelines that take the opposite approach. We can carefully track hundreds of versions across countless assets and shots, but this leads to a lower iteration speed and stifles creative exploration. With Fuse, we charted a new course that gave us the best of both worlds. It preserved game engines' sense of creative freedom and rapid iteration, but it fortified this flexibility with the robustness of a solid VFX pipeline. Having been involved in the creation or upgrade of existing pipelines in the past, I can say that the unique thing about the Fuse project is that, in contrast to how many visual effects pipelines are created, we didn't start from the bottom up. And instead of tackling problems as they came, we had a large scale vision of the full pipeline. So we designed, implemented, and tested each section bit by bit until we achieved our initial vision. For Fuse, we wanted to validate our workflow in a real production, and one that had a scale of a normal VFX production. So FLITE was treated as any other VFX show at Framestore in terms of departmental work. And this shows a breakdown of the amount of departments involved in the production, which by the end, every single department at Framestore had participated in the creation of FLITE. About half of the departments were working in engine and half were working in our traditional VFX pipeline. And our aim was to integrate Unreal Engine seamlessly into our pipeline, making it an additional DCC tool. So this would enable artists unfamiliar with Unreal to continue working as usual, while their contributions would transparently be brought into the engine. Trackability of artist work is key in a complex VFX production, and input of data into game engines tends to be a one-way street and a bit of a black box, making it difficult to track where the data came from. So for Fuse, we created a fully comprehensive ingestion pipeline that would take the data published into our Framestore asset database and automatically ingest it into Unreal Engine. To future-proof Fuse and align ourselves with a more data at the center paradigm, we experimented with the adoption of USD and Alembic as our main data interchange format. And although USD was not fully implemented in time for FLITE, the foundation was laid for publishing each asset version in multiple formats compatible with various DCCs that we use to author data for Unreal Engine. From a technical standpoint, the data is automatically synced into Unreal Engine via Perforce, utilizing our TeamCity infrastructure implementation. And the correlation between assets in Unreal and their counterparts in our database is always maintained through corresponding metadata. This allows us to create automatic QC setups and speed up the process of integrating into Engine the work that multiple departments have done on any specific shot outside the engine. For example, we have here what on the left an animator would see when they play blast the shot versus the automatic QC that would be generated inside of Unreal Engine to QC their work. The system enabled a transformative shift for Tim and his creative process. And rather than waiting through lengthy iterations, he could now see animations less than 30 minutes after briefing tweaks and sometimes even mid-daily session. And here we see an example of what he would have to have seen before our implementation of this whole pipeline versus what he could see on the right every time a new animation was generated. Avoiding duplication, we designed wrapper classes around Unreal Engine core classes like static meshes and skeletal meshes, rather than making our own versions. And this modularity was intended to let us share core data like levels and sequences with vendors lacking Fuse plugins to increase future collaboration. Plugins can act as loadouts, and projects can opt into different combinations of tools based on their needs. And overall, this modularity and customizable design provided flexibility for FLITE and also future-proofs Fuse for adapting to new production requirements. When it came to asset creation for FLITE, the scale was massive, and especially for our two main environments of Stevie's apartment and our futuristic London. Each required an enormous number of highly detailed individual assets to complete Tim's vision, and therefore we knew from the start that asset management was going to be the most fundamental pillar for Fuse. Unreal does have a revision system, but it only lets you store previous versions of assets, and you can't actually use two different revisions at the same time. So for VFX artists, this can feel like a big step backwards to what they're used to. Without live side-by-side testing, it's harder to tweak and improve assets, and you have to constantly override and replace, which breaks up the creative flow. With the managed asset system, all actors and their components, as well as shot components such as sublevels and level sequences, are fully tracked and available concurrently in Unreal Engine in a much more similar VFX workflow. This solidified the key aspects of what we set out to achieve with Fuse, which were flexibility, compatibility, and rapid iteration in Unreal Engine. The managed asset system allows us to add actors to our scene that contain one or more asset trackers, and these allow us to switch between different definitions, variants, representations, and versions of actor components. These versions can be set to latest so that each time that you load the level, the latest available version of the actor will be retrieved, or it can be pinned to a specific version, which effectively locks the asset to that version in that scene. The managed asset system gives us unmatched flexibility, not just for individual assets, but environments too. Through our managed sublevels, our layouts, our rigs, and lighting can easily evolve on a per shot basis. And whenever you publish a new version of a sublevel, the system automatically pins the actor versions inside of that level to what the latest at the time is. This creates essentially a living history of how each shot progresses over time. And in the slide, we can see an example of what that would look like inside of Unreal Engine and how through our custom UI, you could cycle seamlessly through the versions of a layout in an environment, for example. The freedom to tweak, improve, and evolve assets, even late into shot production, is invaluable. And in tandem with our managed level sequence system that I'm going to go into now, it provides end-to-end tracking and versioning across the entire shot pipeline. With Fuse, our shot workflow in Unreal Engine was fundamentally transformed. Shot level sequences are now directly integrated with managed sublevels, enabling dynamic scene assembly each time a shot is open. And this is a dramatic shift from the default Unreal behavior, which typically has level sequences and sublevels that remain separate. But by linking these critical data structures, it opens the door to huge efficiency gains. Shots managed through Fuse are closer to shots managed in traditional VFX shot pipelines. And shot level sequences are effectively the shot recipe that brings in all the elements needed for each specific shot. So now every time an artist opens a shot, the latest valid versions of all character, environment, lighting, and effect sublevels are automatically pulled in to construct the scene on the fly. This means that we now have a way to track versions of each shot in a fully self-contained way. And we can access them through our custom UI, which we can see in this slide. And you can see that changing the version of the shot effectively changes what you see in the viewport automatically, so you can very quickly see what has changed on a different version of a shot. Shot group tweaks are another pivotal innovation for streamlining workflows on Fuse, and they allow us to modify actor parameters in a centralized way, making it simple to roll out changes across multiple shots to multiple artists. We achieve this by encapsulating any per-shot overrides inside managed level sequences. And this means that an artist can, for example, change parts of the layout and save those changes as variants that are immediately available to add to other shots. So as you can see here, we have an example of what that looks like in the engine. So you can switch between different variants of a shot group tweak, and you can do your changes, save them as a new version, and deploy them in different shots. So to do this, you use intuitive actions such as alt drag to copy an individual shot group tweak onto a new shot, like so, or click drag to propagate a shot group tweak onto a large number of shots instantly. Shot group tweaks became the backbone of shot production on FLITE, storing layout, lighting, and shader changes. And without them, we couldn't have finished the project. Unreal Engine provides tools for offline rendering. However, our ambition project demanded a more comprehensive set of tools. To achieve stunning visuals across dozens of render layers per shot, we built upon Unreal's existing multi-layering and render queue manager to enable scalable high-volume workflows. Our enhancements unlock the engine's full potential for our render-heavy production. The three new pillars for our final pixel render pipeline are a new deferred render, a new render layer system, and a new UI for the movie render queue. The existing stencil layer system can lead to edge artifacts in comp, and therefore we created a new deferred render to allow us for hiding actors from camera rates only to mimic more modern offline rendering workflows. We paired this rendering with various custom AOVs and cryptomats, and this was enough for our comp team to be able to work in a similar way that they're used to. Our new rule-based layer system decouples render layers from sublevels, and unlike Unreal's existing layer system, our dynamic render layers are defined by rules rather than manual assignment. This robust solution automatically adapts to each shot's contents instead of relying on tedious manual upkeep. Our render layer definition files are stored as data tables inside of Unreal, and they contain the name of the render layer as well as a wildcard text field where the selection rules are stored. The system lends itself very well to templatability since you can author once and forget, but it also has great customization potential as you can have one render layer definition file per shot if needed. We developed a UI to go with our render layer system, and you could load a render layer definition file versioned with our manage asset system and visualize it. It enabled us to sanity check the rules to ensure the correct asset capture for each layer. And as you can see here, this would be an example on a live shot of loading one of these files through our manage asset system and checking it in the UI to make sure that every render layer contains the assets that are needed. Very early on, we knew that rendering and render management would become a bottleneck on our production, and we had to overcome the main challenges that come with using a game engine as a final pixel renderer. The biggest one is the non-determinism of renders and associated render issues that come with it. And the complexity of our shot rendering configuration also surpassed what the movie render queue was initially designed to handle. FLITE had very long shots, up to 1300 frames long, and those were stitched together to create even longer shots. And due to the non-deterministic nature of Unreal's offline rendering engine, we had to render frames linearly instead of in chunks that could be rendered in parallel, which meant that the stakes when kicking off renders were quite high because of the final render times. Therefore, we designed a UI wrapper to streamline movie render queue integration. And this crucial add-on empowered artists to efficiently manage shots and validate their work prior to render submission. Artists could now have all the data that they needed to check at a glance before kicking off renders that could take several days to finish. And the time that it took before this UI to submit one of our full shots with all the render layers could be up to 15 to 20 minutes to check that everything was done correctly and go through all of the passes. And it came down to a couple minutes of loading this UI, checking everything at a glance, and submitting our final render. We end with the core objectives that drove the development of Fuse, which were the integration with existing VFX pipelines, the feeling familiar for VFX artists accustomed to working in linear content, allowing concurrent versions of any asset, shot, or sequence, pushing the limits of final pixel rendering, and the key aspect of any mature VFX pipeline, which is repeatability and trackability. I'll now hand you back to Theo for the final part of the presentation before we answer any questions.
Thanks, Nestor. Let me just share here. Great. So how did these tools and this workflow kind of work together to change the FLITE production? Well, what these tools enable us to do was to put a single Unreal Engine project at the heart of a complex multidisciplinary VFX production. And by doing so, it facilitated a more iterative parallel production process. The traditional visual effects pipeline is relatively linear, not quite as linear as this diagram makes it look, but essentially you have various departments who do their work, and then there is some kind of QC process before their work is handed down to downstream departments. On Fuse, we worked in a much more parallel way. We shared assets at every stage. Previs flowed straight into Anim. TechViz was driven live from the Previs, with updates passing directly from one to the other. The pre-light was done on the previous scenes and then taken directly into the LED stage to light the live action, so that after the shoot, the two slotted seamlessly together. Final asset builds started on day one and were utilized by every department. And this close integration of previs with the final asset builds, animation, and the pre-light meant we could work the previs up to a much higher standard than usual and make creative decisions in the full context from very early in production, which made for a much more efficient shoot and creative decisions that stuck all the way through the production. And production design really started on day one and continued up until a matter of days before our final delivery. So clearly this approach had many advantages. I'd like to just touch on a couple of the challenges that we faced as well. So certainly getting final pixels out of the engine was the biggest challenge. The non-deterministic nature of the renderer, as Nestor touched on, led to some real logistical challenges. And due to the timing of the production, we were stuck in Unreal 4.27, which meant that we weren't able to take advantage of all the new path tracing features in Unreal 5, which we really would have loved to have done for this production, and would have potentially made a big difference. However, I think it's real testament to the power of the tool set and the workflow, along obviously with a very talented bunch of artists and creatives that we had on the show, that we were able to produce some of the most complex shots I've ever worked on, and all on a really very tight short film budget. I'd like to round everything off by giving you a teaser, a look at the trailer, and then we'll come back to answer your questions and hear a little bit more from Tim.
It's like somewhere calm, moment by moment, and we're in. When did this happen?
It was a few hours ago.
I'll get you into a memory flow. It's too fragmented. The prototype end is not always pleasant.
Just I saw something. Please, you've got to help me. She might still be alive. I can't remember.
There we go. Back to you, Tim.
Well, thank you, Theo, Nestor. Very interesting. So yes, that was the trailer. If anyone wants to watch the movie, the whole movie is available on YouTube. The whole short. It's about 15 minutes long. Most of that is credits because obviously, short film you have to credit everyone who touched it. Please do go and have a watch.